Yo, welcome to my channel Ward Draws a Lot. Obviously I'm Ward, or I wouldn't have named it Ward Draws a Lot. This week we're going to be doing a PARKOO brush marker review. PARKOO was actually kind enough to reach out to me and ask if they could send me their product for free and I could do a review in exchange. An honest one, may I add, which I thought was pretty cool that they let me do. So let's get started. Okay, so the brush set comes with 12 markers of all different colors. It states on the package that it says dual tip brush markers designed for coloring and artists. It says that it's brush and broad nibbed along with 12 colors. On the back, it gives you a little sticker that gives you the swatches of the colors, but I'm still going to do my own swatches, which you'll see in a second. And it also has information on the side about the markers, such as quick drying, alcohol-based ink, non-toxic, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So here's what the colors look like laid out in the package. Off the bat, you could tell that there's like one warmer side of colors and one cooler side of colors. Okay, now we can take a look at the actual marker. So once opening the package, you can see that they're all kind of lined up a certain way with the gray side facing upwards compared to the other side. And the marker states that it has a brush side and the chisel nib side, which is what I was saying, the gray side indicates the brush nib, which actually looks pretty nice and felt pretty nice. I'll explain that later on too. And then on the other side of the marker as a chisel nib, which is actually pretty nice and wide. Some chisel nibs are too skinny, and I know that sounds weird, but I really like the wider chisel nibs. And overall, the marker is just like this whitish color and has a matte finish and felt easy to grip. Now, even though the markers came with the marker swatch on the back of it, I'm still going to swatch the markers on my own, because sometimes the paper you use is different from what the colors might appear on other paper. After swatching, I'm also going to compare the swatches that we got on the back of the package compared to the swatches that I did on my Neenah cardstock. I also used Neenah cardstock for everything this time, because that's what I like to use as like a base, because that cardstock just works great with all markers, I personally believe. So I think that's a great base to go off of, along with give it the best shot that it can have. Okay, so after swatching all of them, I realized that there were a few light colors, maybe like 2 or 3, and then the majority of the rest were darker to mid-tone colors, and I thought, okay, that's definitely a range that I'm going to have to try and figure out how to work with, because usually with markers you want a lot of transition tones, but you can always work your way around stuff like that. So to test it out, I took 2 of the lighter greens and I blended them together, and they blended pretty well together. Then I took a brown and the goldish color and blended those together, and it worked really well too. But when it came to something like the lighter blue and then the darker blue, it was a little bit harder to blend together because you needed another transition tone in between. But there's a way to get around that. I use something called the tip-to-tip method sometimes, where you take the tip of the markers and then put them together, and then put it down on the paper to try and give it a nice transition. I do suggest you take the lighter marker and then put the darker tip on it, so this way you could get a dark to light tip, because the other way around it's a little bit harder to get the lighter ink on top of darker ink, which overall would make it a little bit harder to blend out. However, if it's from dark to light, you're going to have a much easier time using them and overall get a really smooth blend. Like from that blue to the light blue, it looked really good. From the purple to the pink, it looked pretty alright as well. I kind of messed up on that swatch personally. I'm going to put that on me because I really did mess up that swatch, but it did come out nice. Some colors, they don't match as well on the back. The swatches on the back kind of dulled out the colors, so that's why I always like to swatch out on my own paper so I know what it definitely looks like. So I'm going to put these markers to a test by doing an illustration. I took the screen cap redraw that I did the night before of Zenitsu from Demon Slayer. This was done on my iPad, and then I proceeded to print it out on Neenah cardstock because, again, I feel like that's a great paper to work with for all markers. So let's talk about some pros and cons about these markers. A pro is that they're pretty inexpensive. They're 12 markers for $9.99 or $7.99 if you have an Amazon membership, which is 20% off of already great priced markers. So that would come out to 83 cents per marker if you got it for $9.99 or 67 cents per marker if you got it for the $7.99. The marker colors themselves are really, really vibrant and just very pretty to look at. The whole time I was coloring, I was like, wow, I really like how these colors look on the paper, and they just have a nice feel to them. The brush nib itself seemed pretty sturdy, but the top felt like it would fray over time. But then again, you would have to use a marker like a lot for it to fray. I'm talking about non-stop every single drawing that you use for the marker to fray. When I was using the tip-to-tip method to help blend out the markers, they blend out beautifully. When it comes to blending, I know everybody thinks that you need like a billion transition tones, and to a degree, that's kind of correct, but honestly, you can make it work either way. And since I only had 12 colors here, I definitely had to make it work. So in order to transition from that orangey color to the yellow color, I definitely did have to use the tip-to-tip method, which made the process a little longer, but it was totally worth it because it looked so great afterwards. As for the marker ink, it felt like there was a lot in the marker and it wasn't dry, so when I was putting it onto the paper and using it, the ink flow was actually pretty nice in comparison to the strokes that I was doing, so it didn't feel like it was a cheap or old marker. It felt like a brand new marker that had a nice amount of ink in it and that I could use for a good amount of drawings until it would die out eventually. My favorite part of the markers probably has to be that the color lays down great. Like, I'm talking about it covers up a whole area without the need to go over it 5-6 times. It just one time, like here I'm slowing it down a little bit to show you with his shoulder, that I didn't take too much to cover that whole entire area with a yellow, and it looked very opaque, and it looks awesome to me that it's a one nice flat color that I only went over it twice, and then I got this great section of color. It just looks awesome. Now, some of the cons of the markers are that, well, there's only 12 of them. So, like I said, you really have to make it work. And there aren't a lot of colors that I would expect it to be there. Like, there's no red at all, which I thought was weird. There's like a reddish orange, but that kind of threw me off. I was like, okay. As for like skin tones, there's only really like the brown skin tone and then the pink marker, which I ended up using for shading instead of for his skin, because otherwise he would just have pink skin. So I had to kind of work around that as well. So I used the illusion of there being skin because I shaded in a certain part. I also personally use a lot of grays within my artwork, so there was no grays at all in this 12 pack, and I was like, oh, okay. I think personally, for like my own taste, what I would have preferred was maybe getting rid of one of the darker blues and replacing that with a red, and then one of the yellows and replacing that with like a light gray. But that's just what I personally feel like would work for me. Maybe this pack of colors is perfect for everybody the way it already is. Overall, you could still get a great illustration with these markers and blend it out really nicely. For the price, I honestly can't complain because they are such a good value for your money. I think that they're great. There's also like a whole store that they have which has a bunch of other stuff like markers that aren't brush nibbed but have a chisel and bullet nib, but they're a much wider variety, so you could use more of those markers at the expense of not having a brush nib. But maybe some people just like more colors in comparison to just having the brush nib in general, so there's also that. So yeah, thanks for watching, and remember, I love you. Bye.